Yeah, this will be a lot of fun. All right, we have 10 hot takes for the MLB season. I was thinking of doing a 3-3-4 format, but now I'm kind of thinking y'all should have four each, and maybe I just have two, so I can kind of steer the ship a little bit. Your hot takes will probably be better than mine. But let's start, Joe. Start us up here because there's a lot of cool things that could happen this year, but what stands out to you the most in terms of what's the hottest take you probably have for 2025?
So it's a hot take, but it's also one that I already have kind of put on the record. So we'll get it out of the way. Jacob DeGrom once again establishes himself as the best pitcher in baseball, wins his third Cy Young Award, his first in the American League. Some people are going to hear that and think this guy's nuts. And I might be. There's a good chance that I might be nuts. But at the same time, he's healthy for the first time in a long time. That Tommy John surgery honeymoon seems to be kind of a legit thing that we've seen over the past couple of years. Once a guy comes back, his arm is generally good to go for 200 to 400 innings, depending on who it is. Now, I'm not expecting 200 innings out of Jacob DeGrom, but you don't need a full workload for him to be the best pitcher in baseball. A few years ago, he threw 92 innings, and he was like the number 5 pitcher in fantasy. So all we really need is 130, 140 innings. The comp that I've used a lot is Justin Verlander. Justin Verlander, a couple of years ago, everybody thought he was toast. 37, 38 years old, having Tommy John surgery. He was an afterthought in real life and in fantasy. And then he has a sub-2 ERA, wins a Cy Young, wins a World Series, has the best season of his career at age 39 or 40. So DeGrom being a couple years younger, and I think we can agree that at their peak, DeGrom is the more talented arm. He hasn't had the better career, but the more talented arm, I think a lot of people would say. And I think that there's a good chance if DeGrom stays healthy, he does win the Cy Young. And I do think that the health part isn't as big of a factor as we might think just hearing Jacob DeGrom's name this year.
As somebody from Queens, very, very familiar with Jacob DeGrom's work. Patrick, what do you think of this? Because I am seeing some buzz for like the anticipation of a Jacob DeGrom bounce back. And the age is not on his side here. He's closer to
Yeah,
40 than 30 at this point. But do you think this is realistic?
I do. I think I've seen a lot of discourse with that too, with the age. And I think kind of one of the biggest things you can look at is Chris Sale last year. I mean, he had a similar last half decade than DeGrom, and he won a Cy Young in the NL that has like so much talent. So he was dominant last. I mean, there was Paul Skeens. I think DeGrom could have a similar season to Skeens. I mean, he's almost entirely healthy right now. So all he has to do is make 25 starts. I think he could win the Cy Young, qualify for the ERA title. At the least, I think he's almost the most likely comeback player of the year award winner. But yeah, I love DeGrom. He's awesome.
I think we're all in agreement that a healthy Jacob DeGrom better for baseball. So if we do
Absolutely.
get that this year, I agree from the standpoint of like if we do get that this year, he should absolutely be elite. And hopefully he's able to put together the innings. Patrick, what's yours? We'll start off with one of yours. What's your hottest take for
I'd say
2025?
my hottest take is probably that I think the Tampa Bay Rays will make the playoffs. I think they'll finish second in the AL East, ahead of the Orioles. Now, I am a Yankees fan, so I might be biased saying I think the Yankees will finish first. I love their pitching staff.
Mm,
Lineup is all right, but I think the Rays have so much talent on the pitching side. I think in the last hour, Rob Friedman mentioned how so many pitchers were going to be coming back from injury this year, and I think the Rays are one of the best examples for that. Even though Jeffrey Springs isn't with them anymore, they have such a good rotation. Shane McClanahan's back and healthy. Assuming he throws a full season, he's the top 3 pitcher in the AL. You got Shane Baz, Taj Bradley, Drew Rasmussen. They have so many big arms. I think there's a world some of them don't throw a full season, but they have so much depth. They had one of the best bullpens in baseball last year, and they just added Ha-Seong Kim to that lineup. They were a very bad offensive team last year. I think they had like a 90 OPS plus, maybe 92. I think they'll be closer to 100 this year. I think they play the platoon really well, and their stars are like younger. Junior Caminero, especially, you just saw what happened in the Dominican League. He hit that big home run. I think he'll be a really big bat for them, and they still have more young talent coming up.
Joe, you have a Blue Jays hat on.
I
You're,
do.
I believe you're from Toronto, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
You might have mixed feelings about this. How do you feel about this one, given that, I mean, this would impact obviously the American League East. The Yankees seem to have recovered at least decently from losing Juan Soto and trying to pick the pieces and fill out their roster well. There's optimism around the Orioles. we'll see what happens with the rest of the division. The Blue Jays, there's a Vladimir Guerrero decision that has to be made that I may or may not get to with one of my hot takes. But Joe, how do you feel about this? The Rays potentially making the playoffs.
It kind of ties in with one of mine that I'll expand on more later, that I think the Orioles missed the playoffs. And I think that those things are kind of tied together in some respect. In terms of like the American League East, the Blue Jays are essentially a non-factor. They're probably a sub 500 team. If they go out and get Pete Alonso and a couple other pieces, maybe things change. But as of today, I think they're the worst team in the American League East. The Red Sox are promising. But the Rays, there is something there for sure. They just never seem to go away. Even when they have bad seasons, it's like just under 500. And I think with the ballpark upgrade you're going to see this year, you're going to see some more offensive output from a lot of guys that maybe are generally considered, I don't know, not the fanciest players for fantasy or even in real life. Like I think Josh Lowe is going to have a big season. I could see Caminero having a big season. Even like Danny Jansen is primed for a good season. I worry a little bit about how the park will affect the pitching, but the pitching is so strong, and you're going to be bringing McClanahan back. Hopefully we get a full season of Drew Rasmussen, whatever role he's in. Another year of progression for Taj Bradley. A lot of viable arms there and high leverage in the bullpen. So I think Tampa, even at their worst, is like a 500 team, and if things break right for them, easily 90-plus wins are attainable. So I have no problem with Tampa. They never seem to go away, even if you look at the roster on paper sometimes and think it's okay, but they always seem to get it done, and I don't doubt that they will this year.
I'm going to keep us in the American League East, and I'm going to say that your Toronto Blue Jays trade Vladimir Guerrero Jr. this season.
Oh, I'm going to get out of here, guys. I'll see you later.
Maybe I have the NBA trade deadline bug because I've been doing a lot of stuff around that. But I think with this decision is interesting to me because you have a contract extension decision coming up. Obviously, you'd want to re-sign him, but if you're looking around the league, the contract extension number that he may hit, is it going to be palatable for Toronto? And obviously Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who's either in his prime or entering it, he's still very young. He's going to garner a lot of interest, which means if you're the Blue Jays, would you rather pay out however many 9-figure millions of dollars it's going to be, or would you rather just replenish the farm system because you could get back a haul? It sucks. So I think ultimately the reason why I say this midseason is the season begins. If the Blue Jays get off to a shaky start, I think the start of the season is important. If they get off to a shaky, like first couple months, that's when you sort of have to look at, all right, what's the salary sheet looking like? Could we sort of pivot and actually get back, replenish our farm system now instead of taking this to the off season where he can just potentially walk? So, and you're looking at like the Mets are, for example, just buyers all the time now. The Giants seem to want another star at some point. I'm curious about what the Yankees are going to do post Juan Soto. Are they going to go back to star hunting and, trading within a division? I'm not sure that's something that the Blue Jays are going to be excited to do. But Joe, I'm going to toss this back to you, and then Patrick, you weigh in. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., I think gets traded during the season. Your thoughts?
I hope it doesn't happen, but we're trending more towards there's a good chance of it happening, but I don't know that the front office is ever going to actually be able to pull the trigger on it. I don't think the front office is terribly competent to get a proper return back, which is the first thing that kind of worries me. But I don't know that they're actually going to have the cojones to actually trade Vladimir Guerrero Jr., this guy who's been in their system for a decade, was a number one prospect who, if we're being honest, is likely on a Hall of Fame trajectory. If he continues at his pace, there's a good chance he goes to Cooperstown. So that's the kind of guy you want to secure at age 25. I know there's talk about the defense isn't great, whatever. They should extend him. Will they? It seems like they're really far apart in terms of the number. Toronto is throwing out 350, 370, 360, and Vladdy wants close to 500. And I think that he's worth 500. He should probably get it, especially if Soto's getting 750, 760. Is Vlad 2/3 of the player Soto is? I'd argue he isn't, if not more than that. So he should get it. Will Toronto end up trading him? I think we're trending towards a reality where he gets dealt at the deadline, unfortunately. And the longer they wait, the less of the return. If teams are only getting half a year instead of a whole year, those prospects are going to be worse. But we might end up seeing something like the Kyle Tucker to Chicago type of deal, which would break my heart, but it's looking more likely by the day.
Yeah, that would admittedly suck. Patrick, your thoughts on this, especially the financial aspect, because Joe hits a key point there. Like being that far apart with the money. If you're Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and you're a young superstar and you're looking at what Juan Soto just got, you can't you look at that and you're like, I have to get something close to that at this point.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the way you look at the market or at least this offseason, I don't think he has any reason to sign an extension with the Blue Jays if they're not going to go up to 500 million.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, like him getting traded, hinges on Pete Alonso signing. I think if Pete goes back to the Mets, then they wouldn't even consider Vladdy, of course. But I think the Mets have a lot of prospect capital that the Blue Jays would like.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I wouldn't be confident in it happening before the season, but like you said, with the trade deadline, it works, it fits for them. And if the Blue Jays aren't confident in getting him long term, you might as well get as much as you can out of him.
We got one comment that said Luis Angel Acuna and Christian Scott for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Joe, you don't seem too excited about that.
It's not bad, actually. Like, it's not terrible. And I will say that I'm not the biggest prospect person evaluator, but Acuna, I mean, the pedigree is there for sure.
I like him. I like him a lot.
He hits the ground running. People aren't really talking about him this season. I guess they're worried about if he's going to have a spot or not, but he was really good. And Christian Scott was somebody I was in love with until he got hurt last year. I believe he had Tommy John surgery. So, I mean, I would hope for better, but if that is what it ends up being, I'm not going to cry about it. It's not terrible.
Yeah. I think with Luis Angel Acuna, it is the spot. Like, for example, in fantasy, he's one of the guys that I want to put him as a sleeper, but I'm not sure how much they're actually going to feature him right away. I think it's going to be a little bit of a slow play. Like Mark Vientos, for example, didn't start the season with the team. He had to be called up in May, and we're going to see if like Brett Beatty's going to get some time in the rotation at third base or whatever. They still have to figure out the Pete Alonso situation. Is Mark Vientos going to slide over the first? What's going to happen? With Luis Angel Acuna spot, you're still paying Jeff McNeil, et cetera, et cetera. Patrick, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I agree with that pretty much entirely. I like that idea of Christian Scott and Luis Angel Acuna. I wasn't big on Acuna as a prospect, but he looked great when he came up to the majors. I think he fits in well with the Blue Jays, and Christian Scott I loved when I think he did have Tommy John, which would hurt his value, but if I'm the Blue Jays, I'd take that trade, but I don't know if the Mets would. They're really good at developing pitchers, and Scott is he could be top of the line.
Yeah. It's funny because half of the chat is saying it's too much to give up, and the other half is saying it's not nearly enough. So that sounds like it might be
that means deal. It's a good trade. Exactly.
It sounds like a baseball trade to me.
Yep.
I would say, and we also got one comment about like 1 year of I don't know if I don't know if Cohen's doing this if they don't agree to an extension.
Yeah,
like afterwards,
sign and trade type of deal.
Yeah, like he has a ridiculous amount of money, so he can probably just figure out some sort of deal. I don't know if they're going to be able to pay just regular team employees after that, but they'll find the money if they really want Vladimir Guerrero Jr. They'll find the money to do it. All right, that's 3 down. We have 7 to go. Joe, what's next on your take list?
So I'll go to that Orioles one that I alluded to earlier. I think the Baltimore Orioles have a good chance of missing the playoffs, and a lot of it comes down to their kind of lack of activity this offseason. They haven't really done a lot to make the team better. Tyler O'Neill coming in, Anthony Santander going out feels kind of neutral. I mean, it's not a huge swing, I don't think, either way. The rest of the offense is the same. And you can argue that like the progression of some of their prospects are the quote unquote acquisitions. Another year of Jackson Holiday, maybe Heston Kierstad if there's anywhere for him to play. Jordan Westberg gets a little bit better. Adley Rutschman has a bounce back season. You could argue that those are kind of the additions. But then you get to the pitching, and the pitching is a little suspect. I mean, Zach Eflin, I have been one of the biggest Zach Eflin fans in the industry for several years. Is he really an ace at this point? Should he be an ace for a team that wants to win 95 plus games and compete for a World Series? Probably not. Grayson Rodriguez has been good in his career, but he hasn't quite been that ace level pitcher that we're expecting to this point. 250 innings of a 4.11 ERA. So he needs to take another step forward. And then if he doesn't, you got Charlie Morton, Dean Kramer, and Tomoyuki Sugano, and I don't think that there's enough depth there to get them through the whole season. And that you can argue the prospects, Cade Povich, and a couple others. I just don't think they're deep enough, especially in what is arguably the deepest division in baseball, to do it. And we saw in the second half last season, they really struggled, and they haven't been a big player in free agency or the trade market. So I think they're kind of sitting on their hands. There was reporting from Pitcher List a couple months ago that they're kind of sitting on their hands and not doing enough. The GM has been okay to make moves, but he hasn't actually made any moves. And a lot of people were doubting that at the time, and now we are 2 months later, and we're seeing that seems to be the reality of the situation, that they're just not making enough moves. And when everybody else, even the Blue Jays, making a couple of moves, Santander, Jimenez, they've done more than the Orioles have this offseason. So unless there is something coming in the next month or so, especially in the pitching side, like if they get Jack Flaherty, I'd feel a lot better about this. But I think right now they are lacking in depth to compete in the deepest division in baseball, and I think they're going to miss the playoffs.
Patrick, what do you think of this?
I pretty much that's spot on with what I agree with. I think they have some good upside in the rotation. I like Trevor Rogers as a pitcher. I think he's still got some good in him. He's young, but Sagano, I don't know how he'll translate. I think that's like at least a year project. There's no depth beyond that. Like I wouldn't be confident in any other options. I feel like they should have totally gone out and gotten Burns. They really don't have a clear ace. And I mean, if you have Eflin Rodriguez 2 and 3, that's really good, especially in the playoffs. But beyond that, you're not going to get through a regular season winning 90 games. Their bullpen's underwhelming. I think they're a good team. I just don't think they'll stand out in the AL East.
So if we have, well, Patrick has Tampa in, Joe has Baltimore out. I assume we all have the Yankees in the playoffs. Joe, who gets in from the AL East if Baltimore's out? You have the Yankees in. Do you agree that Tampa gets in, and what happens to the Blue Jays and the Red Sox otherwise?
I think it's either Tampa or Boston in that second spot, and then Baltimore. Baltimore, I feel like, is a 3-4, and I might be undervaluing them. But I think at this point, are they a lot better than the Red Sox? I mean, the Red Sox are going to have Campbell and Anthony probably coming up as well to add to an already pretty solid lineup. The pitching is pretty good in Boston. I think they're at least, close to par with the Orioles. So I think that it's probably New York, Tampa, Boston, Baltimore, Toronto. I think as of today, that's how I would arrange it. And Baltimore at 4, probably a lot of people would scoff at that, but I'm pretty down on them this year right now.
We got a comment that says bold prediction: Orioles make the playoffs.
They're expected to make the playoffs. They're kind of expected to, right? I think that a lot of people are expecting 90 to 95 wins, up and coming team, but I feel like they've just kind of gone stagnant here in the market.
I think the commenters is trolling you. Patrick, how would you rank the AL East teams? How do you think they're going to finish?
I feel like the AL East is going to go back to being such like a total wild card for first place. I don't think we'll have a standout like 100-game winner like the Rays would do half a decade ago. I think there'll be like Yankees, Rays, probably a little over 90 wins. I think I should re-say that I like the Orioles. I think they're a good team, but I don't think they're going to be in the upper echelon of teams. I think they could win 88, 89 games and take that 3 spot, but like the Red Sox could do that too. I think the Red Sox have talent, but it depends on prospects coming up. I know they're going to take their time with Anthony, Campbell, Meyer even. I don't think he'll see much until the second half of the season, but they're really talented. They'll be good long term, but I don't think 2024 will be a big year for the Red Sox. And sadly, the Blue Jays are probably going to be in 5th place, but they got a future.
I don't like the way you delivered that. Almost with pity in your voice.
A little bit.
It's dark. It's dark in Toronto. We were terrible. The farm stinks. The roster stinks at the major league level. The pitching development hasn't been good in a long time. You don't need to sugarcoat it. It's pretty bad.
Yeah,
it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Basketball.
If it's worth anything, I hated playing the Blue Jays over the last 10 years. So frustrating. Bichette, Guerrero, they were my least favorite team to play.
I'm seeing Bo Bichette as a breakout candidate, according to some analysts too. So that may offer some excitement. Patrick, your second hot take. What do we have here?
I think my second hot take will be a little more player based. I think Bryce Miller, the starting pitcher of the Mariners, in that incredible rotation from 24, I think he will stand out as the ace by the end of 2025. I really liked Bryce Miller in the second half. I wasn't really that excited for him last year, considering 2023. But that splitter he has is so good. His fastball is going to be great. And he threw 5 different glove side breaking balls throughout the year. And I think once he settles into 2 or 3 that he can command, that has good stuff. He's got a really good cutter. And he's shown some videos of those on Twitter over the offseason, which make my mind explode, seeing some of the pitch shapes. He's really talented. I think he could have a top 3 Cy Young season.
I would love to know what Nick thinks about this, because he knows I lean on him for pitching. Joe, where are you at with this one?
So the Mariners in general worry me a little bit with the home and away splits. They are drastic. If you look at the whole rotation at home, you're looking at you think it's prime Clemens, Pedro Martinez, and it's ridiculous. And Bryce Miller's no different. At home, his ERA was 196, and on the road it was 407. And you see drastic differences as well with the strikeout, like 30% strikeout rate at home, and it was 17%. On the road. So I do worry a little bit about the drastic splits, but I do think that the talent is definitely there. I'm also just a little bit worried about the lack or kind of, I don't want to say misleading information, but we don't really know what's going to happen with the park in Seattle. There's been talk about some fixes to the batter's eye, which could potentially make it a lot harder to get behind some of those early Mariners pitchers, and they're all expensive in fantasy. They're all top 100 picks. So you have to really pay up for them. And with that uncertainty, it does worry me a little bit. Like, I don't really doubt the talent. I think that Bryce Miller is really good, but I think that there are going to be times, specifically from a fantasy point of view, where I sit him on the road, especially in those tougher matchups. And I think it might be a little bit hard for him to reach that top 3, top 5 potential. But if they leave the ballpark as it is, then it's attainable for sure. He had a 294 ERA in 180 innings. I'd like to have a little bit more clarity on what they're going to do there. It's not at Safeco. Jesus, it's called something else now. T-Mobile. T-Mobile is what it's called now. Safeco's the old name, but yeah, some concern. But I do like him. But there is some concern.
Yeah, I miss remembering all the names of stadiums. Now they're all sponsored and they change names every 5 years. Patrick, you were going to jump in here real quick.
I was just going to say I agree. I mean, the stadiums is definitely big. I was not that aware of the home and away splits. That's definitely a good point and something to consider.
For all of them, for all the Mariners pitchers, it's drastic. It really is.
Wow. Yeah. Strange.
Let's go back to Joe because I'm going to save my other one. Because I think it may lend itself to a larger conversation that may take a couple minutes more than I would like. Joe, go ahead with your next one.
So I'm also going to highlight a pitcher that I think is, and the parameter I'm putting, or I'm putting a top 10 label on him. I'm struggling finding my words here. But I think Pablo Lopez is a top 10 starting pitcher in 2025.
Oh, Nick's going to love this.
Nick is going to like this one. I promise I'm not just sucking up to Nick. I think that last season really didn't tell the whole story. A lot of people, fantasy, were dropping him, and people were in the comment sections every day saying, what do I do with Pablo Lopez? Do I sell low? Do I drop him? He's terrible. He's killing my team. And he was in the first half of the season. He had a 5.11 ERA. But over the second half of the season, 277, he got back to that Pablo Lopez that we know and love. 20% strikeout minus walk rate for the whole season. 1.19 whip. The ERA estimators were all below his actual ERA. 346 Sierra. He had a 367 expected ERA, 336 on the expected FIP. The command was very good. In fact, he actually shaved a point off of his walk rate from the year prior. The swinging strike rate is still really good. And Minnesota's pitching development has been great over the last several seasons. So I completely count on them to tinker with a couple things that might have not been working for Pablo Lopez. And it seems like they did down the stretch last year. He's still young. He hasn't even turned 29 yet. So I think this is going to be a big year for him, and he's a top 10 starting pitcher in baseball.
Patrick, how do you sort of approach this one?
I fully agree with that. I love Pablo Lopez. I thought he would take a step up in 2024, but I still thought he had a really good year. I had him on a couple fantasy teams, and a few blow-up starts early. Kind of like, I feel like that tainted his public perspective almost. Yeah. Like, at the end of the year, I'm not too familiar, but I think he had like high 3 ERA. So I think if he can now take that 408, yeah.
But to be fair, it was 545 in early June.
Yes, that's
and
true.
Progressively just improved as the season went on.
Yeah, I mean, I'd hate for it to be his thing to like start off slow every year, but I think the arm talent is great. The Twins are perfect for him. I really like him as an arm, yeah.
We have one comment here. I'll toss this to Joe because it was your take. Pablo's control was very good, but I'm not sure about his command given that he got barreled up a bit. Your response to that is what?
Yeah, he's for the last couple of years, the barrel rate has been in the, it's not been terrible, but 9%, 6.3%, 8.2%. The hard hit rate isn't so bad. So I don't think it's a huge problem for him because he's always kind of lived in this range, albeit it was a touch higher last season than it has been in the last couple of years. But in 2022, it was a 9% barrel rate and he gave us a 3.75 ERA. I think that he can work through that. The home runs haven't been a historical big problem for him. 1.1 homer per 9. So I don't see that as something we need to worry so much about, but it's a good point.
Yeah. Sub 4 ERA in 4 straight years before last year, where he just was barely above that line. Also an all-star in 2023. Maybe he returns to that form. Patrick, let's go to another one of yours, and I'll get to mine after.
My next one is going to be on a hitter. I think Riley Green of the Tigers is going to finish top three in MVP voting. I think he struggled with injuries early on in his career, and that kind of leaves him forgotten. When he's healthy, he's not only a great hitter, but he's a solid defender in left field. He runs the bases pretty well. I think he slowed down a bit in 24, but every underlying peripheral for him with the bat was really good. I think if he throws up a full season, he could have 900 OPS, 6.4 season, and he probably won't be drafted too early. I think it's all about health, and he could really be the bat the Tigers need. I mean, they had a playoff team last year. The pitching is still fine, but I think if he's a big bat, they could really take another step forward.
Ended with an 827 OPS last year. 900 would be a pretty big jump, but seems I mean, he's only going to be in his 4th season.
Yeah, I think he's 25, and I mean, he plays in Comerica, which, like, I think Park Adjusted would love him no matter what, really.
Oh, yeah. Joe, what do you think about this one?
Well, some of the park changes they made, I believe it was before last season, were to bring the wall in a little bit in right field, and I think it was generally agreed that this was to help Riley Green, your star of the future, your left-handed bat, and he hit 24 homers in 137 games. I think that the potential's there for him to easily hit 30 plus, 13% barrel rate, 91.3 on the EV, 46 hard hit. Like, those are solid numbers. 135 WRC plus. That doesn't grow on trees. You can't just find that around. And I think the lineup around him is also really good. I've talked up the Tigers for a while now. I feel like they're kind of a dark horse. I don't have a big hot take on the Tigers today, but I think that they're a lot better than people think. And I don't know if that playoff run was so fluky, other than maybe they just kind of figure things out. And Riley Green, I don't know that he's a top 3 MVP guy for me. I think that would need everything would need to be perfect for him, but I think he can hit 30 homers, steal probably 10 bases, and hit 275. And honestly, that could be, with enough runs and RBI, that could be a top 10 MVP voting guy. And he's not really being drafted that way. I know there's a difference between real life MVP and fantasy value, but I mean, he's going in a lot of cases like 130th, I think, is his ADP, something like that. So it's a good price. The talent is there. The ballpark is getting better, and the lineup's getting better. So I don't have any real complaints there. Riley Green is a fantastic pick.
I think we're at 7 takes right now, so this would be the 8th. I'm going to go with mine. This one's a team-specific one. This one is not a popular one, but I am betting against the Dodgers.
Ooh.
And I don't think they're going to make it back to the World Series this year. Despite the fact that they've loaded up on talent, despite the fact that they are far and away the best team overall. But in baseball, we don't see a lot of repeat champions. In fact, I don't know if we've had any since the Yankees of the late 90s.
Yeah.
Going into the early 2000s. And the National League is really good. I think a lot of people just sort of like, hey, the Dodgers are going to run through everybody. When this is baseball, it's not the NBA, and even the NBA has more parity now. But the randomness of the playoffs, we've seen the Dodgers, granted slightly different iterations of them, over the last few years, lose before winning this most recent World Series, lose to teams in the playoffs in kind of embarrassing fashion. Teams that they won 15, 20 more regular season games than they got swept in the NLDS in 2023, which is actually shocking to a lot of people, myself included. And I'm just looking at, all right, if you're giving me Dodgers or the field in the National League, this is a National League specific thing, because if they get to the World Series, they can take care of whoever's in the American League, all due respect to, the Blue Jays and the Yankees.
No respect needed.
Yeah.
Just don't want to disrespect anybody's teams here. But if I'm looking at the National League and you're giving me Dodgers or the field, I generally don't, in a sport like baseball, want to take team over field. Yeah. We've seen too much of this where it's like, hey, they can lose a playoff series. And really, you got to look at the NL East, because that's where the conference is going to come out of. Now, you worry about how much all 3 of the Mets, Phillies, and Braves are going to beat up on each other. But I feel like it's going to be one of those teams that ultimately could take out the Dodgers if anybody's going to do it. I toss this to you, Patrick, and you say what?
I actually agree with this take. I think the NL is extremely competitive. I don't know if we've seen a more competitive league in decades. I mean, even the NL West, you see how much the Giants have done this offseason. They have Young Ho Lee coming back. The Diamondbacks just signed Corbin Burns, and I mean, they were in the World Series 2 years ago. Um, yeah, the Padres were sneaky good. They almost knocked out the Dodgers last year. They haven't done too much, but they're still competitive. And I mean, yeah, the NL East is great. I think the NL is so crowded, but I think the Dodgers could win the division, but lose early in the playoffs.
Yes, which they've done multiple times in recent years, being a 100-win team in multiple occasions and losing in the NLDS. Joe, where are you at on the Dodgers as it relates to the rest of the National League?
So the way I view it is it's more so about what happens internally than what happens in the rest of the National League. It's a matter of staying healthy. This Dodgers rotation, by the end of the year, I was mentioning this, the Mariners home pitcher splits. The Dodgers rotation could end up looking like those Mariners home pitcher splits where everybody has like a 2.5 or less ERA. But there's also a lot of risk there. Blake Snell is perceived as the safest option in the rotation at this point by a lot of people. And Blake Snell is somebody who has quite an extensive history of injuries. The last couple of years have been pretty good, but the refrain with him forever was that he can't throw 180 innings. It's tough. It's tough to project Blake Snell as just being fully healthy for the rest of his career as he enters into the middle part of his 30s. So some concern there. Yamamoto missed a lot of time with injury. Tyler Glasnow is still Tyler Glasnow, and the injuries are always there. He missed time at the end of the season. Roki Sasaki, we got the report the other day that he was recommended Tommy John surgery in Japan. So who knows what's going to happen there? And then you have Tony Gonsolin and Dustin May coming back from injuries. Not sure really what to expect there. Ohtani might come back and have a sub-2 ERA over 30 starts, and I wouldn't be surprised with this guy if he wins a Cy Young, but at the same time, you don't really know what to expect. We don't really know what the exact procedure was that he had. I don't know that we ever fully heard if it was I think it was the brace, but I don't think we ever got firm confirmation on that. So there's a lot of concerns with the starting pitching. I mean, I said it the other day on Twitter. I was looking back at some old show notes from last season from podcasts, and James Paxton was their ace in the middle of the season last year because they dealt with so many injuries. They are pretty deep and they can probably overcome that, but this is a pretty volatile rotation they've assembled. And if the injury bug does come again this year, could very easily see the Dodgers doing what they did a couple of years ago and getting swept by the Diamondbacks, who are another up-and-coming team in that division. I think that there is a lot of risk here. As much as you project them, like they could set the all-time record. They could beat that Mariners 116 wins.
116.
I don't think anybody would be that surprised. And I think 100 wins is probably going to happen one way or another. But once you get to the playoffs, if they don't have the healthy arms there that they are expecting to have, might not be as rosy of a road to the World Series as they think it is.
Yeah, and look, when the NBA eliminated the 5-game series, it eliminated a lot of first-round upsets because you got them more often. And in baseball, you still have these 5-game series in the NLDS and the ALDS. So, it's happened to the Dodgers a couple times lately. Patrick, what do you think of not just the Dodgers and not just the Dodgers' perspective of this, but the field from the standpoint of the NL East contenders in particular, and how this could shake out between the Mets, Braves, and Phillies, and who may be best suited to challenge the Dodgers, assuming, I don't know, mostly healthy, because we can't assume full health because nobody's ever fully healthy in sports anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's tough to say. I think crazy stuff happens every year, but I think it's probably going to be the Mets. As a Yankees fan, it kills me to say it, but the Mets have a really good offense, especially like the top 2/3 of that lineup. There's so much star power. If the Dodgers rotation gets injured a lot, they don't have all these aces. It starts bringing up questions. Who's going to be like that game 3 starter, game 4 starter, like it was last year in the World Series? It didn't matter because Walker Buehler was throwing like 30-inch sweepers, and everybody else was doing great. But I think health is going to be a big problem. It's never going to be easy to overcome arm injuries. And even with all this depth, they need a lot to still go right.
And look, maybe biased here, at the risk of sounding biased here. I am higher than consensus on the Mets lineup because I don't think Brandon Nimmo's 224 average is who he is. I think that was just an anomaly last season. We'll see if they get Pete Alonso back. He hasn't been awesome the last couple of years, but in a lineup that you now add Juan Soto to, it's probably helpful to have Pete Alonso there, although I think they could figure it out without him. But there's a reason that reports have come out since where he's allegedly directing Scott Boras, like, hey, can you talk to them again? Because I'm not really getting what I feel like I deserve out here in the field. And he wouldn't be the first Scott Boras client without a deal in damn near February. But you have like Francisco Lindor, who he's inevitably going to start slow, and he's probably going to miss yet another All-Star game because of a slow start. And then at the end of the year, it's going to be like, oh yeah, he's one of the best players in baseball. And we tend to forget this because he's hitting 200 by the end of May every year. And then he turns it on. And obviously Juan Soto, I think Mark Vientos is legit. The stuff that he was doing last year in the postseason, he had 5 home runs, I think 14 or 13 RBIs during that run. I was looking at, hey, could I bet him to win NLCS MVP if the Mets are actually, contention to do this? And then, you look at Francisco Alvarez. I didn't think he had the season that I was expecting last year, but he's still a young guy who could really pop. And in terms of power, like just the addition of Juan Soto is going to help. And then we'll see what some of the young guys we've talked about could provide. Is Luis Angel Acuna going to be legit? And is he going to get the playing time like as the season progresses? That's probably more of a summer to fall question than a spring question. And then we'll see what happens with, how much does Jeff McNeil have left? Can Brett Beatty give you anything? And is anybody else going to come on down the pipe? And then as somebody who watches a ton of Met games, the Phillies and Braves always scare me. You would have not wanted to be in the room with me during that Philly series because it was very, very intense. And this is the only team I get like this about in sports. But the Phillies are really good. I think they're going to be good again. And I think the Braves, I think most people would say the NL East is going to produce 3 playoff teams again this year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's my spiel. See what the comments are not going to agree with me on this. Dodgers cash advantage.
They're not happy with us in the comments.
I don't know if it's that extreme, but we'll see. I don't think it's any. Hey, we're here for a good cause, guys. All right, we're just
go donate. Go donate.
Yeah, yes.
They are hot takes. Exactly.
Yes.
Hot takes for a reason. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're here to have a discussion.
Not lukewarm takes.
We have a couple of takes left, but we have some time, so we'll get to a couple of questions here. PD says the Dodgers. Oh, just lost it. Dodgers cash advantage is the depth it provides. Yes, they are.
That's a good way of looking at it.
You want to talk about rolling in money. I mean, geez.
3 guys get hurt, they could go trade for 3 more guys, and it doesn't matter. That is a point for sure.
And they'll be looking at teams who may have some measure of expectation, who struggle out of the gates, or it could be the same old teams where it's like, hey, the Marlins, are you guys really going to try to, come on, whoever's your best couple players, we could just take them because we're the Dodgers, try to raid some of those type of teams. We also have the Dodgers do this is from Brett. The Dodgers do so much during the regular season to ensure that they are as healthy as possible in October. I'll say this. I think a lot of training staffs are doing the best that they can, but injuries are injuries and things just happen. It's just tough. It's tough in any measure. It's just tough to really do all you can to shield yourself from injuries. That's in any sport. You could train as diligently as possible and not do this because of your elbow joints and not do this because of, your neck might turn this way. It doesn't matter. Sometimes you just get hurt.
Here's an impromptu hot take. Landon Knack starts a playoff game for the Dodgers in 2025.
Wow. I don't know if that's a great thing, but I mean, look, with
all the injuries that are potential landmines in that rotation, I wouldn't be surprised.
It also leads me. All right, so let me ask this then, Patrick. You answer this. Is there an arm out there that you think the Dodgers, if the Dodgers do have some of the injuries that we may be talking about as a possibility, is there a pitcher out there that you think they can go and get between now and the end of July?
It's a good question. A lot of it depends on injuries around the league too. That'll kind of create demand and see what kind of pitchers are available. As a Yankee fan, I'd love to say Marcus Stroman is available, which I don't think he would fit into that rotation right now. But when June comes, you never know. He doesn't get injured too often. So, Dodgers, you're welcome. He's all yours. We won't ask too much.
Fastball Fred coming for my neck. Any anti-Dodgers take is overthinking at this point. They have more than enough margin for error in the pitching staff now and 3 MVPs at the top of the lineup. Listen, I'm just saying the superpowers don't always win at the end of the movie. So we'll see what happens. But I mean, it's really a National League or the field thing. And I'm 99% 5% of the time taking the field over overwhelming teams. And generally it works out because stuff happens. I was going to say something else, but I'm not sure Nick will want me to curse on here. Okay, we have a couple left. We'll go one each. Joe, Patrick. Joe, give me a hot take.
So I have 2 left here. I got to decide between the 2 of them.
We may have time for bonus ones if Nick.
I may have time for the bonus one. So let's go with another player, and I'll save the other team one for the end. Seiya Suzuki finishes in the top 10 MVP voting in the National League. I am obsessed with Seiya Suzuki if he can just stay healthy for the whole season. And it looks like he's going to be predominantly in the designated hitter spot. They have the outfield taken care of. Maybe he plays a few times. Hopefully he does to carry over that fantasy eligibility. But I think, if you look at this lineup, it's a lot better than I think a lot of people might think, especially if you've just kind of been casually following the offseason. Most people probably realize they have Kyle Tucker now, but Ian Happ, Kyle Tucker, Seiya Suzuki, Michael Busch, Dansby Swanson, Nico Horner, Pete Crow Armstrong, who was fantastic down the stretch, and then Matt Shaw, who's a wild card who could also be really great. This lineup is pretty deep. You got Suzuki projected to bat right in the middle of it. He's probably the number 3 hitter. You've added Kyle Tucker. You've replaced Cody Bellinger with Kyle Tucker, essentially, while also having some ascending young talent there. You got the guy who had a 138 WRC plus with 21 homers, 16 steals, and a 283 batting average. I think the batting average is somewhere in the 270, 280 range, and he can hit 25 to 30 home runs while stealing. I think the whole package is there for him to give you 100 runs, 100 RBI. A lot of this is health dependent because we have seen him miss some time over the last couple of years, but a healthy Seiya Suzuki, I think, is in the running for a top 10 MVP vote in the National League.
Okay, good, because I was going to see if I could push you further into that and nudge you to see, all right, is he going to be top what in MVP voting at the end of the season?
10.
Top 10. Top 10. Mm-hmm. For a team that is favored to win the division, by the way, which somehow I feel like we're not talking about that enough. But I think that's because of people like me who are infatuated with the NL East. Patrick, what are your thoughts on Suzuki and the Cubs in general, if you don't mind? Because I think they're an interesting team in this mix of National League teams that I'm now assembling to take down the mighty Los Angeles Dodgers.
I love the Cubs. They've been my NL team ever since I started watching baseball, but I think they're really sneaky good. I think the rotation has some questions, but that lineup is one of the best in the NL. I think Seiya is a really good hitter. He steals bags. Even when he was healthy, I considered him a 5-tool player, but he just couldn't stay on the field. I think DHing will help him. I think he could get over 140 games. And I think if he's healthy, top 10 is a good bet. Probably closer to like 8 or 9, just because he's a DH, but he steals bases. That whole Cubs team is really strong though. But yeah.
Brett says, is that an endorsement of the Cubs or an indictment of the NL Central that the Cubs are favored? Which I thought was a great comment.
Not a great division. Not a great division.
For what it's worth, Brewers second, Reds third, then Pirates and Cardinals tied. That's how the odds are sort of shaking out there. Reds sneakily, I kind of like them this year. Beyond just Ellie De La Cruz, which who doesn't love Ellie De La Cruz? We also got another one from John Doe 090. Would you rather? This is a good question. Would you rather say a Suzuki or Riley Green? I suppose this is a fantasy baseball question, of course.
I'm personally more on the Seiya Suzuki side, even with the increased price. But it's not a bad comp. I think you get more speed probably out of Suzuki, a few more steals. Gonna have to dig into that one a little bit more because Riley Green might just be a couple round discounted version of Seiya to some degree. But I think as of today, I'm still going with Seiya Suzuki. But it's close. It's close.
I also feel like you can get them both. Like maybe it's an either or depending on where you are in your draft. But I mean, I feel like you could also just get them both in similar-ish territory, maybe. Although Green is going later, 30 picks later, ADP right now on NFC drafts. Okay, so we have Patrick. What do you think about just the Green versus Suzuki comparison?
I think it's really close, but I would take Suzuki just over the track record. I think if he's DHing, he'll play more games.
Sure.
He'll probably steal more bags. I think they'll have similar output, but really, like, if you miss out on Suzuki, I would be fine taking Green a round later in like a 12 team. I think Green is a really good bat. I think they provide similar value. And even if Suzuki's DHing, he can play any outfield position. for fantasy. So I think fantasy-wise, I would take Suzuki, but maybe outside of that, if I'm investing in a player, I would probably pick Green. But they're both very good.
Yeah. I feel like you can get both if you like both.
Mhm.
Lineups better in the National League than the Cubs. Dodgers, Diamondbacks, Brewers, Phillies, Braves, Mets.
Brewers might not be anymore.
Not Brewers. Yeah.
That's probably the only one there, but everybody else. I mean, I don't know if the Giants would be there, but
Yeah. I don't know if I'd put the Diamondbacks over them either. I think it's close. But Tucker's like a top 5 hitter in the league. He's really good.
Yes. All right, Patrick, give us one more. We got a long comment. I'm not going to be able to read all this now, but maybe we'll get to it. We'll circle back to it at the end. Patrick, give us another one.
My last one is the most hot take I have. I think
let's go.
the Washington Nationals could compete for the final wild card spot. Now, the pitching is very suspect, the bullpen even more so, but you got Dylan Cruz and James Wood, who are both elite potential. I don't know if it'll happen next year, but it could. They got some good depth signing. Nathaniel Lowe is a very good hitter. I think all around they're a pretty solid team. I would not say they're great, but I think they could finish third in the NL East potentially if one of the NL East superheroes ends up having a rough year. I think they will finish over 500 no matter what, though. They need to have a good deadline and commit, but they have talent for sure.
Cruz, second shortest odds to win National League Rookie of the Year, behind Roki Sasaki.
Yeah. No qualms here. No qualms with that one.
Yeah. Joe, what do you think about that one?
I like the Nationals. Their lineup is probably a little bit deeper than people think. Nathaniel Lau and Josh Bell, pretty solid additions there. Just solid guys that you can depend on every year where there's not a ton of variance really. And I think the pitching is actually, you might be selling them a little bit short. I think their development last year was really good. Mackenzie Gore, ups and downs in the middle of the season, but I did think he made some good strides. Mitchell Parker came up out of nowhere and was really good. Trevor Williams, before he got hurt, was doing well. Jake Irvin had a great year. And then DJ Hertz, who I love DJ Hertz. He was also really strong, especially below the surface. I do think, and they added Mike Soroka, who I don't know if he's going to be a starter or a reliever, but he was pretty good down the stretch out of the pen. Jorge Lopez as your projected closer is pretty ugly stuff. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that one, but I think the starting rotation is pretty good, and I think the lineup is good. And I think that if things break right for the Nationals, could they be like an 87 win playoff team that sneaks in the way that the Tigers did this year? I think they absolutely could.
Patrick, let me toss this to you. The Nationals sneak in at the expense of who in the National League East?
That's a good one. So, being fully honest, it's probably the Braves. I think they had a really down last year, and they have so much talent. Obviously, 2023, they were probably the best team in the NL. But if things don't go right for them, if they keep going wrong like last year, I don't think it would be the Phillies or the Mets. I mean, it's tough to say because in all likelihood, Nationals will be fourth, and that could still be a playoff team. But I think they need a lot to go right for them. I should have mentioned their pitching. I do like a lot of their starters. I don't know if Josiah Gray is healthy, but I think he could end up being like a number 2. That's pretty good. Mackenzie Gore is a similar pitcher, but they definitely have that bullpen is really bad. Like, I think Michael Soroka should be in there just for a guaranteed decent arm, but they have upside. They need to have a good trade deadline, but I like them.
Yeah, I think you saved the best one for last. Okay, someone asked if we could just recap our takes. We've done 10, and Joe has a bonus, so we have a couple minutes here. If we could recap all 10, Joe, your 4 takes were what for the people?
Well, this is when they're going to get the receipts. They're getting their notepads out and they're writing them all down.
Yeah. They're going to keep score. Come back in October, be like, you were wrong.
They're going to get tagged in some tweets in October, I think. But Jacob deGrom, once again, establishes himself as the best pitcher in baseball, and he wins his 3rd Cy Young Award. The Baltimore Orioles have a disappointing season and miss out on the playoffs. Pablo Lopez is a top 10 starting pitcher, whether you want to take that as fantasy or real life. I think he'll be top 10 in either one. And Seiya Suzuki finishes, I'm going to say top 10 in NL MVP voting. And I'm going to add a kicker on that he'll be a top 25 fantasy player as well.
That's very, very good to know. Patrick,
like that.
You're 4.
So my first take was that the Rays make the playoffs, finishing 2nd in the AL East. My next one was that Bryce Miller finishes 2025 top 3 in Cy Young voting and the ace of the Mariners staff, which really isn't saying much, but I think so. Riley Green will finish top 3 in MVP and will really be recognized as a superstar. And the Nationals grab the 6th wildcard spot, or at least compete for it. I think they could be a competitive team for sure.
And I have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. getting traded midseason and the Dodgers not going to the World Series in 2025.
Nice.
Joe has a bonus. I was thinking about having a bonus, but I might pass on it. Joe has a bonus. What's yours? Before we get into some questions to wrap this up.
So this one's pretty hot. This one's kind of spicy.
Let's
but
go.
I think the Oakland, I'm going to call them the Oakland A's all season.
Me too.
So
I still call the Raiders the Oakland Raiders also.
People need to accept that. They're still the San Diego Chargers. Yep. We just go to the old names.
St. Louis Rams.
I think that the Oakland Athletics at least come very close to making the playoffs this season. If they don't get in, then I think it's one of those situations where it comes down to the last weekend of the year and they're a team that's 85 to 87 wins and really surprises us. The lineup is strong at the top. Butler, Rooker, J.J. Bleday, Shea Langoliers, Tyler Soderstrom, Zach Geloff. That's very solid. It's not the Dodgers, of course. It's not the Braves, but it's very, very good. You're also talking about a ballpark upgrade, and that will work against the pitchers to some extent, but I don't think it's a massive, massive change, but it's enough where it's a positive for the hitters. It's a PCL park. It's a minor league park, but it's not one of the more hitter-friendly PCL parks, but they're coming from the Coliseum, which is just, it's awful, awful for hitters. So slight improvement there for the hitters I'm expecting. And then the pitching side, I mean, Jeffrey Springs, I've always been a big fan of. He's a lot older than people might think. Jeffrey Springs is going to be 33 this year, but he is solid. I think that he is relatively healthy. Luis Severino is solid. JP Sears is an okay arm. I mean, I'm kind of stretching it a little bit here. Like, they need to do a couple things, but they have a great closer. Jose Leclerc and a couple other guys are not bad in the pen behind Mason Miller as well. And I think that if things break right for them in the same way that we're talking about the Nationals could kind of sneak in, I think the A's could sneak in. It's a hot take. It's a hot take. They're far from a polished product yet, but I think they're going to take a big step forward this season.
The owner would do some cartwheels after moving them and getting all the flack that he's gotten for moving them. Will be doing cartwheels with this take. If they were to get into the playoffs, what does that look like in the AL West? I assume you have them behind the Astros, but what does the division look like if that's the case?
They would have to be third because I think it's Astros, Rangers, and then it would have to be the Athletics in this situation. Maybe I don't know. I don't think they can. I don't think they can out-duel the Rangers. But I think that maybe the Mariners, with their offensive shortcomings, especially if there are some park adjustments like we talked about earlier that makes life a little bit harder for their pitchers, that would be the scenario where they sneak ahead and finish third in the division there. It is pretty unlikely, I will say that, but I do like a lot of the things they've done over the last year in particular. And the ascendance of Lawrence Butler was a huge, huge thing for them. He could be like a 25-25 guy at the top of their lineup. So I think if things break right, 87 wins and they just edge out the third spot there in the West.
You have someone in agreement saying, love this. I've been saying all off season, there's room for the A's to take a wild card. Also adds Jay's connection is strong here. That's Justin.
Yeah, he's a Canadian guy too.
Yeah, there you go. We also have one about love the DeGrom predictions. So there's another point in your favor. This is from Amin, the last king of Sandbar. I don't know the reference, so I may not have read that with the charisma that you may have wanted. Love the DeGrom prediction. He should be doing it as Met. Oh, that one hurts. I gotta be honest with you. Patrick, what do you think about the A's generally this year?
I really like that take. It's a lot like my Nationals one, I think. I wouldn't say I agree with it, but it's certainly interesting because the AL is weak. They were weak in 23 or 24. They will probably be weak again in 25. I see them more as maybe a 500 team just because some of the pitching I'm not super confident in. I think their bullpen's kind of I like a lot of the pitching additions they made. I think Springs will be really good, but they gotta show me something with the pitching development. I mean, Severino had a great year with the Mets, but he also completely retooled his arsenal. He was basically a different pitcher. He was throwing 6 pitches at some points. And I do like the Athletics. I think they have a good roster, and especially that lineup. I mean, Lawrence Butler is a future star. Brent Rooker is one of the best hitters in the league. I think they could be closer to 500, but I would be super happy if they made the playoffs. That'd be cool.
I want to say Luis Severino had like very different home road splits last year. Also, I remember that being a thing where whenever he was at home, I was like, okay, good, trust him there. And on the road, it was like, oh boy, this could be an event. This could also be a short, 2 2/3 outing if he gets sort of lit up.
At home, Severino had a 2.96 ERA, and on the road, it was 5 even.
Yeah, that tracks. It felt like it. It felt like every bit of it. I'll tell you that right now. JR Cade says Mariners shade. I don't hate the Mariners this season, but I get the A's sort of being. I mean, look, it's a hot take show.
I wouldn't project the A's to do better than the Mariners, but in a perfect world for the A's, I think it can happen. Especially if the Mariners don't like. If I think the Mariners could potentially be like a sleeper for Pete Alonso. This is not like locked in on the reporting. This is just stuff like a kind of a guess. If they do add a Pete Alonso to go with Julio and Randy Rosarena, like that could really change the perspective. Where Pete Alonso goes is going to have kind of a big impact, obviously, but we're still waiting, and we might be waiting for a while.
Yeah. We'll see how that one ends up. Ryan asks, Twins 2025 outlook, ? I'll leave this open to the floor.
I think the Twins are really good. I think the pitching, I love the pitching. I was doing a Fantasy Pro show earlier today, and we were talking about David Festa. He needs to have a spot in that rotation. Like, that's the first thing I think about with the Twins. Get Chris Paddock, get Simeon Woods-Richardson out of there, get one of them out of there. At least David Festa deserves a spot, but the pitching is strong. The bullpen is really strong. The lineup was a lot better than you probably remember. They were, I believe, a top 10 or 12 team by WRC Plus last year. Solid, like Duran and Jackson, like everything. I mean, there's not a lot you can point to there as big flaws. I would say they're probably my pick to win the Central as of today.
Let me toss this one to Patrick because this is funny. Gavin says the Nats making the playoffs isn't really a hot take. Seemed to be everyone's dark horse. And then John replies, Nationals are 4th worst team by F4 projections this season.
Yeah, I think I'm not the biggest fan of F4 in projecting team success. You're right. The talent on roster is not great, but they have a lot of really high potential. Like Cruz is a top prospect in baseball. We saw what James Wood did, and he doesn't even pull fly balls. I think the rotation, they've developed these pitchers really well. I don't think we even talked about DJ Hertz until he was in the majors last year. I like their development. I think they got talent.
That's not true. All right. I called DJ Hertz the best pitcher on the Nationals when it was this time last year. Okay.
That's great. I was mistaken.
He is the best pitcher.
I don't love DJ Hertz though, Joe. I'm so sorry. I think his fastball isn't as good as it is. And there's nothing against lefties because the changeup can be very good against righties, but it's not consistent enough yet. But maybe he does take the lead. That'd be cool.
Give him time.
Have a good third option.
Yeah.
Nick, how do you feel about the Dodgers this year?
I mean, it's dumb and it's annoying. I hate it. I mean, I think there is something to be said about the crapshoot of the playoffs is a real thing.
Yeah.
Even like I think one of my favorite things about baseball is that in season, the best teams are a 65% chance of winning. The worst teams are a 35% chance, right? And that's like winning percentage. That still means I've 1/3 of a chance to win a game. Crazier things have happened. Where it's like a 55 versus a 45 is still like, whoa, that's a lopsided one. So it's no guarantee. I'll take the field instead of the Dodgers winning this year.